Hello again. I'm Jeff Livingston, the historian with the Hawaiian Railway Society. Most everybody is at least familiar with the Oʻahu Railway and Land Company. Very successful common carrier railroad that was developed on the island of Oʻahu by Benjamin Franklin Dillingham. Very few people are aware that there was a second common carrier railroad called the Koʻolau Railway. James B. Castle started the Koʻolau Railway in July of 1905, well after the ORNL was established in 1889. There was a total capital stock worth $50,000. Each of the company's 8 officers held 1 share of stock valued at $100, while the Kahuku Plantation held the remaining 492 shares of stock. The railway was granted a charter in August of 1905 for a period of 50 years. Their charter allowed them to build a railway from Kahuku to Honolulu and tunneling through the mountains into the Manoa Valley. The first portion of the railroad was to be built from Kahuku, where it joined with the ORNL, to Kahana, a distance of just over 10 miles. The railroad ties arrived in February of 1906, and the rail used to build the railroad was salvaged from the defunct Pacific Heights Electric Railway, which was a trolley line, which is a whole nother story. The railroad formally opened for service on the 22nd of December, 1906, 9 miles between Kahuku and Punaluu. There things sat for a while. As of that date, there is no record of any equipment owned by the Koʻolau Railway. So it's assumed that the Kahuku Plantation provided the locomotive and cars to open the railroad until the Koʻolau Railway received its own equipment. Now at Kahuku, the railroad met the Oʻahu Railway and Land Company at a station. This is the Kahuku station of the Koʻolau Railway. This photograph is from 1946, and the railroad at that time had already ceased operations, but there were no changes to the basic structure of the building. There was limited service and limited stops. In Laie, the stop consisted of simply a shelter. Now, this is a rather poor picture, but given that the railroad was virtually unknown at the time and the time period that it operated, very few people made it out to the windward side with a camera. They would get as far as Kahuku, but seldom went further. But this is the shelter stop or station at Laie. Although the railroad originally had a terminus in Puʻaluʻu, no photograph of that station has been located to date. When the Kahana station was built, a very nice station and freight shed was constructed. We were very fortunate to find this photograph of Kahana. I wish there were a few more like it laying around. It would make research so much easier. At this point, the railroad was about 10.3 miles long, and plans were still in progress to continue. There is a bridge today at Kahana extending over the river that was built, tracks were laid. The entire railroad at that point reached a distance of 11 miles, but never proceeded past that point. For whatever reason, that's where the progress of the railroad ended. Some of this might have had to do with Castle himself. It's very difficult to try and figure out the business relationships between all of the various movers and shakers of that time period, early 1900s, up into the 20s and 30s even. It seemed like there was a relatively small group of men, entrepreneurs, businessmen, investors, that had a massive amount of control over the economy of Hawaii, and were very, very involved in each other's business. Not uncommon to have a board of directors containing people that owned other companies, and the president of company A was a director of company B, C, and D, and this was just a rotating mass of individuals in business. James Castle, I think, was kind of unique, though. He did have some experience with steel rails prior to the Koʻolau Railway. When the Honolulu Rapid Transit was floundering, he stepped in 1901 and provided funding and guidance to get the company up and running again and profitable. Castle appears to me, this is my opinion now, to not only be a superb businessman, but a dreamer. He likes projects. He liked starting things, making them come to fruition, and once they were established and operating, functioning, he lost interest. He wasn't interested in the mundane day-to-day operations of a company, a corporation, or an entity. He wanted to build things. He had ideas, and he wanted to make it happen. Your opinion may be different. That's just my observation based on what I've read. Now, there were portions of the Koʻolau Railway that were just spectacular. This is a section of the main line. Unfortunately, I cannot identify exactly where it is, but this portion was taken in 1910, and I would love to travel down that railway even today. Eventually, the railroad did purchase a locomotive, and Baldwin Locomotive Works records show that a locomotive was purchased for the Koʻolau Railway through the W.G. Irwin Company in 1907. So evidently, Kahuku Plantation supplied that equipment for somewhat of an extended time. This first locomotive, naturally, was number 1. We're not sure exactly when it arrived on the island, and pictures of it are difficult to find. But this is Koʻolau Railway number 1, a fairly standard Baldwin design, and very close in design to a typical plantation locomotive. This was not a mainline, high-speed passenger locomotive that you would find on a railroad like the ORNL. This was much more typical, a little bit bigger perhaps than the typical Baldwin locomotive used on a plantation. Now the Koʻolau Railway had a limited amount of equipment. They did, over time, own 2 passenger cars. And at its height, I think there were 21 or 22 freight cars. The earliest photo we found, which again, we're not sure exactly of the date, shows a passenger car and a boxcar. Now what's interesting about this picture, the passenger car appears to be a repurposed horse car. This is not a typical construction for a passenger car for a common carrier railroad. It has 4 wheels, it has curved sides, and you can see where a running board may have been attached to it at one time down the entire side. We don't know where this car came from. I suspect it may have come from the tramways, Hawaiian tramways, which was a horse-drawn operation that preceded the Honolulu Rapid Transit, or it could be one of the early Honolulu Rapid Transit trolley cars repurposed. Behind it, that boxcar is also only 4 wheels. Typically, that is a plantation-style piece of equipment. The ORNL had very few 4-wheel cars, and only in its very earliest stage, and they were not used for anything other than construction. All of the ORNL cars were 4-axle, 8-wheel cars, both the passenger cars and the freight cars. Later, we find that there was a combination car. Now, this combination car's history is totally unknown to us. Its design is very similar to the cars designed and built by the ORNL as commuter coaches in 1920. And this particular group of pictures is dated right around that same time, 1920. This combination car bears an uncanny resemblance to ORNL combination car number 40. The window design is different in that there is an upper window above the sliding sash, where the ORNL cars did not have that, or at least there appears to be in these photographs. It's difficult to tell by any means. But that's Koʻolau Railway number 1 behind it. Now the location of this photograph, I believe, would be Hauʻula. And if I mispronounce some of these names, please forgive me. I've only been here 30 some years, but it still gives me trouble. To our knowledge, there were no passing tracks on the Koʻolau Railway, and the only yard facility would have been at Kahuku, where it interchanged with the ORNL, and a small shop maintenance area and a small yard at Hauʻula. We know of no sidings, no extensions at all at other locations along the railway. But at Hauʻula, they did have a shop, and here's a photograph showing a few more of the freight cars. Again, these are 4-wheel, typical plantation equipment. Now, the Koʻolau Railway ran 2 passenger trains daily. They left Kahana in the morning and met the ORNL train headed to Honolulu later in the morning. They then returned to Kahana and then left Kahana in the afternoon and met the ORNL train in time to travel back to Honolulu and again return to Kahana. So Kahana appears to be the starting point for all of the passenger trains. But when not hauling passengers, I'm sure the locomotive was stabled here in the engine shed, which you can see off to the right-hand side, the engine shop door. Excuse me. While it was awaiting its next turn, or handling freight movements up and down the line. The Koʻolau Railway only had access to these tracks, though, for its two scheduled passenger trains per day. Any other time, the tracks were used by the Kahuku Plantation as plantation railroad tracks. So there was kind of a lopsided balance. Now, normally the ORNL did not enter onto the Koʻolau Railway tracks. There were a few instances, however, where an ORNL passenger train left Honolulu and traveled all the way to Kahana. We know of two such instances that were reported in the paper. One was a tour for the military, and the other was a gathering of McKinley High School students going to a festival in Kahana, and the train ran the entire distance from Honolulu to Kahana and then returned. Now, the Koʻolau Railway had no means to turn a locomotive, so I suspect that the ORNL train ran engine first into Kahana and then had to back itself all the way back to Kahuku, where there was a Y and the engine could be turned, put back on the front of the train, and hauled back to Honolulu. In 1910, the railroad reported carrying 1,056 passengers and 31,152 tons of freight. This is not a railroad that is going to make money. This operated more as a private railroad, and it was designed and used and built to further Castle's dreams of developing the windward side of Oʻahu. Castle owned a huge amount of property on the windward side and did his best to develop it. He wanted immigration. I'm sure that all of you may not be aware of it, but he did bring Russian immigrants from California to one of the islands to try and establish a colony. Didn't work out, and he paid to ship those same people back to California. As I said, he was a dreamer. He wanted to start things, and once they worked, he was done with it, and if it didn't work, he at least took care of it. His dream to develop the windward side depended on a railroad. His idea was that independent farmers growing sugarcane, pineapple, any other kind of goods, sugar could be milled at a communal type mill, and the railroad was extremely important part of that, because without it you couldn't get your product to a mill and then the product from the mill to Honolulu. He also planned on developing a steamship line, and I don't think that ever really came to fruition. But his idea was to be able to pick up material anywhere on the windward side from Kahuku to Waimanalo and bring it to Honolulu. The Waimanalo plantation did in fact use both sail and steam ships to move its sugar to Honolulu, as it had an internal plantation railroad, but had no connection to any other railroad. Just recently, a picture came up on eBay of all places. I was fortunate enough to acquire it. Now, this picture is of Koʻolau Railway number 1, and it appears to be moving an ORNL boxcar, because we know that the Koʻolau Railway did not have such a boxcar. Now, they may have interchanged with the ORNL and hauled boxcars such as this, perhaps as far as Laie, to the plantation there if they needed equipment or whatever, and then brought it back to Kahuku. We do not know for certain. This, we believe, is in Kahuku, but we're not sure. If anyone recognizes that building or buildings in the background, please contact us at the railway, info@hawaiianrailway.com, and tell us your thoughts. What building is this? This appears to be a residential area, because the building to the right in the background appears to have some kind of a garage or lanai underneath it. But this larger building in front, just behind the boxcar, we don't know what it is. Quite possibly, though, it is Kahuku. Castle died in April of 1918, and the railroad, Koʻolau Railway, along with a number of other castle holdings, were purchased by the Mormon Church the following November 1918. At that point, the Baldwin Locomotive Works records show that a second locomotive was ordered for the Koʻolau Railway. And this time it was not ordered through a third party, it was ordered directly for the Koʻolau Railway. So our supposition is that it was ordered by the Mormon Church. It was ordered in 1920. That was the second and final locomotive owned by the Koʻolau Railway, and it became Koʻolau Railway number 2. Now, this photograph is Kahuku Plantation number 2, which is the same locomotive. We have found no pictures of this locomotive marked for the Koʻolau Railway, KR versus KP. This became a plantation locomotive, number 2, and was actually the second number 2 of the Kahuku Plantation, as it replaced an earlier locomotive. Kahuku Plantation did not take over the railroad until 1930, so it was operated to that point by the Mormon Church. The 2 locomotives, of course, when the Kahuku Plantation took over the railroad, both went to the plantation. And in 1930, the railroad reported that it carried 50 passengers, 50, that's it, for the entire year, and 50,811 tons of freight. Now, for an 11-mile railroad, even as small as it was, those are very, very poor numbers. So in 1931, Kahuku Plantation, as owner of the railroad, filed with the Interstate Commerce Commission for abandonment. Now, the Interstate Commerce Commission was involved because, as you recall early on, this was a common carrier, so it had a public service to perform. With 50 passengers in a year, you can't provide much service. The ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission, approved the abandonment effective January 1932, and that relieved Kahuku Plantation of any responsibilities in operating a common carrier railroad. Now, the tracks remained in use as the Plantation Railroad up until approximately early 1950s. Actually, the Kahuku Plantation was still operating their railroad, although by that time they had shifted some large portion of their operations to diesels by steam. But Koʻolau Railway number 1, when taken over by Kahuku Plantation, became Kahuku Plantation number 4. And this is a really good picture of number 1. She was unchanged essentially when she became Kahuku Plantation number 4. Of the 7 common carrier railroads in Hawaii, the Koʻolau Railway was most certainly the smallest. Never profitable. It was built to fulfill a dream, to make it possible to expand settlement and prosperity on the windward side of Oʻahu. Had James Castle not died in 1918, who knows what may have been. It's an interesting supposition, but we'll never know. If you have any other further information about the Koʻolau Railway, if you have pictures, ask your aunties, ask your uncles. Somewhere out there, there may be some. And the Hawaiian Railway Society would love to see them and to make them part of our collection under the donor's name. All donations of photographs and memorabilia are kept under the name of the donor. So please, if you have anything out there, let us know. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to help. Thanks so much.